Hello, I'm delighted to be in Chicago again, and yes, I brought my Southern drawl. And it's okay, life, my grandchildren do. The New York Times said early on, I've got a terrible Southern drawl, but if you can get past that, I've got a great story. And the problem with my story is not just Lilly Ledbetter, it's your story too. That's why I'm not a special person. I'm not even anything famous, but my story has resonated with so many people across the nation and around the world, and it touches every family in this country. I never started out in life to have my name on a lawsuit that would eventually end up in the Supreme Court, nor did I plan to have my name on a bill and a law that would become so well known around the world. I planned to work hard, I'd raise my family, educate my children, save and build a nest egg, and someday I could retire in Alabama and I could clean out that cluttered garage and I could read those books and enjoy the rest of my retirement. I thought that was simple. That's a simple plan, and that's the way it should work. Well, you have to live up to your end of the bargain for that to work. My name is Lilly Ledbetter, and I lived up to my end of the bargain, but Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company chose not to live up to theirs. And that's why I'm here today, and I'm really appreciative of the opportunity. My employer did not live up to his end of the bargain, and that's why I'd like to share my story with you this afternoon. And that's why I continue my fight today, because that is not the only employer that does that. There are over 60 million women out there in the working field today, and many of them are the only breadwinner in their families. A lot of them are single mothers, and what's happening across this great nation, our families are slipping. They're doing without, not because those women are not hard workers, and many of them that talk to me in airports tell me, I work 2 jobs, Monday through Friday, and I work a day on the weekend, and I still cannot pay all of my bills. It's time that we get our companies and our employers on target to pay what they should. But my story basically begins in 1979 in Gadsden, Alabama, when I hired in with Goodyear Tire and Rubber as a supervisor in their radial tire plant that they had just been built in 1976 to an old plant that was there since 1929. I was hired and was one of the first females that ever held that job. There were so few females in those particular positions. There had not been anyone that had set precedent and a track record. And prior to going to Goodyear, I was a district manager for H&R Block, and prior to that, I was assistant financial aid director at Jacksonville State University. And 6 of my years back in those days, I was working 2 jobs, 2 full-time jobs, 9 months a year. So I experienced and I know what these people are speaking about. But I hired in, and they gave me a night shift manager's job because it took 25 years to rate day shift, but that was okay. I was a night person. I liked it. My family enjoyed it. They could see me in the daytime, and I'd go to work at night. But I worked there hard. I could do anything that any of those men could. And some years I got raises, some years I didn't. And I never knew if they were as good as what other people got, because Goodyear kept what everybody got paid a secret. When I hired in, they said, if you discuss your pay while working here, you will not have a job here. So no one ever discussed their pay. We had no idea if we were getting paid properly. Also, when the cost of living increased the top, the mid, and the bottom, we didn't know if we were even above the minimum. If that had been a bill that would have required that by my employer and they would have posted it, I would have known those years when I was paid below the minimum. And I wouldn't have got trapped in the situation I'm in today. One of the reasons that I got trapped, I feel like, because I consider myself fairly well educated. When I hired in with Goodyear, they had government contracts. They were making airplane tires for the government planes. They were making Jeep tires for Vietnam. When I left in 1998, they were making Hummer tires for Iraq. Now, they were getting government contracts and no one was holding their feet to the fire because equal pay was signed into law by John F. Kennedy in 1963, Title VII in 1964. I got the job, I just didn't get the money. In the early 90s, they started the light truck radio division in Gadsden, Alabama. They handpicked 4 managers to start that up, and I was one of those 4. That was quite an honor. In 1996, they gave me the Top Performance Award because of my outstanding performance, they told me, in the year I had had. I never got any hard evidence on how much less I made than the men until I got that anonymous tip one evening when I got to work. It showed my pay and 3 men. We 4 had the exact same job, not similar, same job. We ran that factory 7 nights, 7 days, 24 hours a day, and my job was exactly like those 3 men. My pay was 40% less than either one of those men. I was devastated, I was humiliated. I didn't know how I'd get through the night. And halfway through the night then, I thought about my overtime pay. Well, first line management was paid overtime, and that cost me a lot of money. And then I thought about my retirement, my 401k, and my contributory retirement, and today, my Social Security as well. I told my husband I had to file a charge with equal employment unless he objected, and I can tell you now, I said if I start, I'll be in it 8 years. There's not a quick solution to a case like this, and they're drug out. Corporations have big money. They can spend you out, they can wait you out, and they can wear you out. They don't want little people to achieve what they're entitled to in life in this country. He said, what time you want to leave? And he supported me from that day right up until his death in December of '08. He did not live to see the bill passed. But we went to Birmingham, Alabama, and I filed the charge in 1998. 1999, they called and said, you've got one of the best cases we've ever seen. You may want to get your own attorney and go forward. And that's what I did. I found a young attorney in Birmingham, Alabama, took my case on a contingent basis, which meant whatever I got, his firm got 50%. Sadly to tell you, we didn't get anything, neither he nor I. But we worked on that and finally got to federal trial in 2003. I had 2 wonderful, courageous women who had worked at Goodyear. They came and testified on my behalf. One of them had given up 22 years service. They asked her on the stand why she never complained. She said, I was a divorced mother supporting a handicapped son. We live paycheck to paycheck. I could not afford to miss a check, so therefore I never asked about my pay. But after a week, the jury came back on Friday afternoon with $3.8 million. But the judge had to tell the jury and myself that I was only entitled to $300,000. You see, Congress put that cap on in 1991. I didn't know about the cap. I knew about the 2 years back pay going in. A person is only entitled to 2 years back pay. Now, you can work 40 years or 50 years if you're so healthy and enjoy work, and then you can file, but you only go back 2 years. But the judge explained to us that there was a cap, and the jury had given me that large amount simply because they were trying to offset all of the lost overtime pay that I had lost through the years and the lost retirements in the future, because there's no law that would allow a person to gain any of your lost retirements. They're gone forever. That's why when I visit college campuses, I tell those young people, when you start working on day one, you make sure you're paid properly, because it goes on for the rest of your life. It follows you on into retirement. I couldn't let it go. I could not. But Goodyear appealed, and we were heard in the Supreme Court in November of '06. My husband had just had the left side of his face removed with cancer and grafted skin, because life goes on and not many people can see a case through for 9 years like I did. And they are extremely hard on individuals, and they're harder on their families. But I couldn't let it go, because that's who I was and that's who I am. I continue to be that same individual today, because there's so many people hurting in this country. But when we got the verdict back in May of '07, I couldn't believe it. Justice Alito said I should have filed my charge in the early 80s, even though I didn't know it, even though I couldn't have proved it. But the law had always been interpreted, and the precedent had been based on paycheck accrual, which meant if you're still getting a check and you find out that you're discriminated against for whatever reason, you've got 180 days in any state in this nation. But what Chief Justice Roberts, Alito, and those other 3 justices did that day, they changed the law, and that's not their job. They changed the law. But Justice Ginsburg, she said, these people don't understand what it's like in the real world. People don't stand around water coolers discussing their pay, and even if you knew somebody was making a little more money than you, it might not be discrimination. And she challenged Congress to take that fight up and to change the law back. And that's exactly what they did. Within 2 weeks, my lawyer called. He said, Lilly, we're going to Washington. And I did, because I didn't have any money to buy a plane ticket. My husband was doing radiation and chemo, and back in those days, gas was about $5 a gallon in Alabama. I had no money. He said, I got you a ticket. Meet me at the airport. He and I went to Washington, D.C., and I testified before the House committee that very day after giving a big press report. I testified twice before the House, twice before the Senate. It's important to get this word up there and take care and change these things that are such injustices to our American families. I also had the great honor in 2010 to testify on behalf of Elena Kagan, because you see, I used to be the type of voter in Alabama that I thought, this guy looks good on TV, he sounds good, I bet he'd make a good president. I don't do that today. I research that person, where did they come from, because the Supreme Court in 2007 changed Lilly Ledbetter. I'll never be the same person again. I will never have the same direction in my life, and it changed my family forever. But that's okay. We're changing people around the world. The first invitation I got after the bill was signed into law in January of 2009 was Rome, Italy. The Italian ministries invited little Alabama Southern drawl Lilly Ledbetter. My Washington lawyer and I went to Rome, Italy. We told my story for 6 days. This is exciting, people, because I learned we need to guard our votes, and we need to elect people that put Supreme Court justices there, because we never know. I would have never dreamed my life would have been determined by a Supreme Court. Never. I would have thought that would have been the last entity that would have ever touched my life in Alabama. One young reporter during all this, and since the bill was signed, she said, well, do you not understand defeat? Why don't you accept it and stay home in Alabama? Because that's not who I am. And that's what I was so impressed when Chicago called for me coming and sharing my story. Because you and I can make the difference. We can persevere and make a change and correct these injustices, and there are many of them. But when we fought, I went to Washington off and on during my husband's illness. I stayed up there for 3 and 4 days a week. My job would be, the Women's Coalition in Washington would buy me a plane ticket and put me in a hotel, and through donations, I was able to pay parking at the airport and get gas to go to the airport. And I testified, and I went into every Republican office that we could get an appointment. And I had a lawyer from the National Women's Law Center, and they would get appointments, and I'd be on the call-in radio programs to educate the public about what was going on. And then it took us 18 months to pass the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. I'm told in Alabama, I'm probably the only Alabamian with a law ever named for an individual. I get introduced in the same sentence as Rosa Parks, and that's quite an honor. They tell me at the law schools around the country where I go to that there's less than 35. It's not a common thing. And I told the president, Obama, when he signed the Ledbetter bill, you've given me an awesome responsibility. And I make sacrifices today to go around the country and talk to different people, because this is critical. So many people believe, and college people, a lot of the students think we have equal pay. Well, take it from me, we do not. And there are so many senior women like myself living in poverty simply because we did not get paid what we were entitled to. After everything that's happened to me, I've come to realize that the true test of a person is not so much what happens to us, but how we react to it. Later on today, I'll have the great honor to be in the hall with Grace and Grit, my fight for equal pay at Goodyear and beyond. The grace comes from my being a ballroom dance competition person for 8 years. I competed all the way to Miami, Florida, and won every entry I made. So the writer of the book, she took the grace. She said, I can't believe a dirty rubber worker cleans up so well. I said, and very graceful too. So that's where the grace came from. And there are some movie offers already, but we haven't settled on anything yet. So I would appreciate if you buy the book, because it's not just a Ledbetter story, it's everybody's story across this nation. And anytime you get an opportunity, help me make a difference for the people and the women and the children across this great nation. Thank you.